Hey guys, Splash here. Just quickly before the podcast starts, I just want to personally apologise for the delay on this episode. Obviously, we're about 4 months late now, and I do apologise for that. Real life caught up to me. A lot of stuff was happening. Didn't have time to edit it, so I just want to say, be aware that the content in this podcast episode will be outdated, as it is very, very old compared to what's come out recently. Obviously, as you've probably seen, we got featured on the Frozen Byte developer log, and we've also changing schedule to be more manageable for us. We're changing to a episode bi-weekly, so it's every 2 weeks we'll have a new episode, and we're now receiving help on editing from Free, who's obviously one of our guests. So basically that's it from me. Enjoy the rest of the podcast. Just thought I'd let you guys know, and once again, I sincerely apologize for the delay. Hi, I'm Splash, and you're listening to Channel Zero.
They call me the Wanderer, yeah, the Wanderer. I roam around.
So today we're joined by 3 different guests, and so we've got Wall, who was in the last episode, so everyone knows him. We're also joined by Kenetor, so Kenetor.
I'm Kenetor. I run my own faction, the Keyboards, and also run a Starbase-oriented YouTube channel.
And we're also joined by Free.
Hi, I'm 3. I'm the director of R&D at Skyjack Industries. This basically means that I'm responsible for figuring out the game mechanics and how we can apply them for designing ships, for example.
Okay, and so today we're talking about, what I mentioned at the end of the last episode. We're basically continuing on about kind of like the economy and how it will affect player events, and we're going to be taking a big focus and look at player events themselves. And so if anyone really has any starting remarks about that topic?
So we talked last episode, and we were discussing how the fluctuating economy is going to change how players interact with each other and will hold these big events. And by big events, we mean companies hosting public forum events where you could come and join as someone from outside the company. Like one company has said that they want to host a sort of race, sort of like a NASCAR or Formula One style thing. And I think that's really going to play into the economy, like with gambling or maybe sponsoring racers. What are your thoughts on that?
I think sponsors will be pretty cool because it will allow, it will make player events, and it'll make player events a lot more interesting, and it'll make the universe feel like a lot more alive because you'll have like sponsors. And I think also another interesting thing would be like stuff like you've got with GNN, Galactic News Network. They've got sponsors, if I remember correctly. And so I think it kind of makes the universe feel more alive and like feels like a better community because you've got like whole kind of simulations of kind of like real life within it.
I really like the idea of the racing league. I'm part of the Discord for it as well, and I just think it'd be a great idea for nice, peaceful competition between factions that may be at war, for example. They could still kind of interact with each other and fight in a kind of more friendlier, non-combat manner. I think that'd be really cool.
I think it will also lead to like a lot different metas as well, because if provided it gets big, you'd have obviously the very obvious meta, or not meta, but kind of like attempts at making the most powerful combat ship. If the racing league became big, which I reckon it will, you'll end up with like a whole different subdivision of a lot of people trying to focus on making the fastest, best racing ship. And I think that will, you won't just be focused on who can make the best PvP ship. There will also be who can make, the fastest racing ship.
I think this could have a really large impact on the economy of the game, actually. For example, if the racing becomes really popular, the demand for racing ships will become really large, or it will just increase by a lot. So there will be a lot more companies focusing on these kind of designs. So I think it's really interesting how that affects the game's economy.
Yeah, with the different levels of flight computer as well, I think the rarest one requires a really expensive rare mineral, so I think that will help fluctuate prices of that one as well.
Yeah, definitely. Kind of, if it pays off, will definitely like inflate prices of certain stuff, which could as Free said, affect the economy quite a large amount, because you suddenly have these mining companies, if they are getting these resources, will suddenly become way more profitable from a racing league taking off.
It's certainly going to increase fuel usage, that's for sure.
Oh, I see. When you have events that are dedicated to specific styles of gameplay, even if you have multiple different kinds of it, like maybe you have a combat event or like an arena sort of thing, they're going to fluctuate the prices of certain resources, and seeing how that will affect how people strategically take certain resources and how they bottleneck them to maybe make certain events more popular, and how the whole ecosystem will respond to this is what I'm most interested in, I think.
I think I'm also interested in like the social aspect of it, because say for example the race only did take off, you could end up with kind of like celebrities, and obviously in air quotes, but you know what I mean, like people are kind of more well known around the community for being good racers.
Yeah, I think that's one of the better points of the community as a whole. Being able to recognize people that are very good at one thing. Take Okim, for example, who's been making a ton of ships over on the main Discord. Like, he's really well known now for making really cool ship designs already.
Yeah, I've seen a few of them. They actually look pretty good. I think we definitely maybe have to talk to him at some point, because it'd be pretty cool, because I have seen his designs and they're very good. But yeah, I think the racing league would be a very interesting concept, and I do hope it does pick up, sorry, because I think it would be very fun, and I'd personally like to enter myself.
Oh, I'm definitely going to be entering.
Yeah.
So the thing you need to consider when talking about these player-made events and their effect on the economy is that the economy is a large, even you could call it living construct, because if you have, for example, this racing league, it will set off kind of a chain reaction in the economy. Racing ships will get more popular. They need minerals, so mining will get better paid. Then this will ensue that transports are being more popular because the minerals will be need to be transported, and so on.
Not only that, you're going to have also the other implications of how you're going to secure this player-made event. So if it's a race, the race course itself needs to be secured from pirate factions and just raid factions that just want to come in and disturb it. So you're going to have to find mercenaries to guard your event and patrol your event. They're going to need paying, and they're going to need fuel and weapons and whatnot. Then you've also got transporting your racing ship to the event as well. You could end up with people setting up to sabotage, like lead racers on the way to the event. That could be quite interesting as well.
Ooh.
It could create like a whole separate section of economy, just purely focused around just this one thing.
Definitely. And something that I'm really interested to see is with these public events, it's going to create opportunities for not only companies to compete and make a name for themselves, but also for them to contribute in the operations of it. So if they want to make themselves look like a upstanding part of the community, they might offer to secure the event for cheap or for free, even, um, as a way of building relations with the public.
Yeah, and I think that kind of goes back to the thing of sponsorship, and yeah, it would allow companies to kind of grow, as you said.
What kind of events, Kenetor, are you looking for outside of racing? Do you have any ideas personally?
I'm not really sure. I think a treasure hunt type deal would be kind of funny. So you could like lead people from place to place to place, maybe solve a clue or something to get the next location or coordinates, and you got to have a kind of mini race to find like the prize at the end. That could be kind of cool.
It'd be really funny if I don't know if you've heard of it, but I think it was Cicada 3301. I think it was called. It was like this massive, like 4-year long online puzzle thing. But I'd honestly would love to see that recreated within Starbase, and I think as you said, that'd be a really sick concept of just some mad treasure hunt, and then you could just have smaller ones as well.
Yeah, I think it will take quite a bit to set up, but it could be very interesting to just like leave that first clue for the community and just see how much people could take to it.
A player event I also kind of want to see is kind of like a fight club kind of thing of like a controlled warfare. Like you could have like a cornered off area, and you have like team capture the flags, or like team, or even like duels of just one fighter versus another fighter, which I think would lead to some pretty cool, not only like just gameplay aspects, but also I think it would be pretty cool to watch as well.
I had quite a few ideas myself, and I think if we go into the whole events paradigm, then we're probably going to end up clustering it as one quote unquote event, but it'll have different themes for each event. So it would be kind of like is if you took like the NFL and integrated other sports into it, it'd be kind of like that. That way, it doesn't limit us to just racing or to just this thing or that thing. We can expand and explore other ideas for people to compete in.
So another thing to consider about these huge player-made events is that they will be really difficult to actually pull off successfully. For example, the fighting league you guys mentioned would have to be organized correctly, so people would actually be aware of it. It would have to be protected enough to prevent pirates from raiding it or people from escaping with the prize, for example, and so on.
Definitely. I think that's going to come down to the company hosting it has to have the resources available. And I think trying to do this when you're undermanned is just going to put you behind. It's going to restrict what you can do with the operation rather than expanding upon it.
I think, yeah, it will definitely lead to, I think you will have some big names in the hosting the racing league, as we know, there is already a whole faction dedicated around it. And I think other events that would also be cool to see, because of course we have mentioned a few others. I think seasonal events would be cool, because a lot of the games do like seasonal stuff. But obviously, the devs themselves have said they don't really want to, kind of control the game too much. And so it'd be interesting to see if you have like players coming together to celebrate Christmas or Halloween or something.
Definitely. Kenetor, how do you feel that this will affect faction interaction? Like, say two factions are at war, how will these events bring them together, or will it divide them further apart and make them more at odds?
Well, I think it can go either one of two ways. It will, as I said earlier, give them a route to compete in a very different manner that doesn't involve completely just obliterating each other at first sight. Or they just won't get involved at all because they'll be too busy fighting their wars. With a lot of these like bigger, more aggressive factions, they're used to playing these games where you've got this PvP 24/7 fight style, and they're used to having a fight that's a week long or 2 weeks long, where they get different members in their faction from around the world, and that fight just never ends. So they're used to that sort of gameplay. So to take people out of that to go do something else requires a lot more work on their end to make that work. And I don't think that they would do it unless there was an agreement there with whoever they're fighting.
Well, something to also consider is perhaps the prize pool of these events could be big enough for full companies to go in and say this is a strategic resource rather than this is a publicity stunt. So if you have like maybe in like a combat gauntlet sort of style, you have these massive carriers and it's company versus company. I'm talking hundreds of players on each side. If you have an event like that, you could say at the end of the event, you can salvage from the wreckage whatever you want. Whatever's left is yours if you win, whatever the win condition may be. And that may be a strategic resource, say, to bolster their military.
I think they'd end up losing more than they would gain in that case, because they still have to fix the ships that they used in the first place.
Well, this would be like you provide the ships sort of scenario. Like the event provides the carriers and the fighters.
Ooh, that is going to get expensive.
That will be very, very expensive.
What I was thinking for the races is that you would pay like an entry fee, and that would go towards helping secure and run the event, but also towards the prize pool to guarantee that there is something to win at the end.
Yeah, because there's no point in racing if there's no prize.
That's fair. So, what are your thoughts on like building competition style events where a small amount of resources get dedicated to them, and they have like this many hours to build a ship using those resources in an enclosed environment, and then they use the ship for that competition?
I think that would be quite a cool concept because you've seen like I can't remember I think it was something like Last Time Gamers did something very similar on Space Engineers, and while it was a short-lived series, he didn't really do very many because, of course, after a while, for a YouTube channel, it kind of got very repetitive. I think actually watching it would be fun, but it was a very interesting concept, and I personally really did enjoy watching it on YouTube because I think it kind of made it much cooler. I think especially for content creators, hosting them would be very interesting because it makes for a much more, at least in my opinion, enjoyable watching experience, and enjoyable experience for any spectator. Because not only do you see the ships fighting, you actually get to see the build process behind them. You get to see the ship being built from the ground up. The design chain is maybe, haphazardly made halfway through. And it makes when we actually come to battle, it makes it feel a lot more, I don't know, like kind of leading up to something a lot more because you can see them, actually building it.
I don't know about basing it off of a set amount of resources, because the trying to figure out what you can build out of those components will be pretty tricky considering how many components there are in the game. It might work for something like Space Engineers with essentially a very limited selection of components in comparison to what Starbase has. But if you limited it to, say, a part count of like 1,000 parts or 2,000 parts per ship, that you could probably get away with a bit better. But that would be dependent on having like a part count listed in the design, the ship designer.
So an event like that would probably attract most of the huge design factions or lone designers as well. Like they would be really lucrative for larger design factions to gain publicity.
Then you've also got to think about how is that going to be judged at the end. Is there going to be a set of tests that ship has to then complete? Maybe like a small race, a cargo run on, or how much cargo capacity it can take, and target practice or whatever. See how many like drone targets it can take down in a certain amount of time.
Right, and that would be like, so think of you've seen people with like airsoft having all the parts of their gun, or having a gun and dismantling it and then rebuilding it, that sort of thing, where you take the component of the ship and you build whatever the ship that you need is supposed to look like and supposed to function like, and then you have to go and compete at the time limit with the other ships. So if your task is to build a racing ship, and you maybe one of your thrusters, the line got cut accidentally or something along those lines, or you forgot to connect it, then you have to race with one thruster gone.
Yeah, that'd be pretty interesting.
Really throw in a lot of limitations and really show who is the most efficient designer and construction worker.
Yeah, I think efficiency is going to be a very big thing in this, like overall the whole game, with like how many parts you make your ship out of. Could you use a really long beam instead of several short beams, for instance, just to bring that part count down? Because it's that part limit that really chooses the performance level of your ship. Now we've seen the biggest Empire ship that they've got is something like, I think it was 96,000 parts.
It was 115 meters.
Yeah, 115 meters, which isn't that particularly big for a ship, especially not what people are used to out of like Space Engineers, for example. So if you could make a bigger or more efficient ship, more lightweight ship for using less parts or using the bigger parts instead of having lots of smaller parts, that could be a key like telling sign on how good a ship is and how efficient it will be as well.
But then, and this could be entirely wrong when the game releases, that may kind of affect durability, because at least in my mind, if you have like lots of really long beams, if one of those beams gets destroyed, that's now a massive beam section you're missing. Or if you've got a lot of short beams, one beam can get destroyed, but you've still got a lot larger kind of area of beams.
That's the payoff then, I guess. It depends what you're building for. If you're building a racing ship, you're going to want efficiency. If you're building a combat ship, you're going to want redundancy.
So something to note about what you just said, Splash, is you said if you had a really long section of beam versus multiple sections of beam that were connected together, and we're just talking like a line, no matter where it gets cut or which beam gets cut, that whole beam section is then useless because it's no longer connected. Unless you have it teeing off at every beam, there really is no benefit.
No, but what I mean is, like, if you've got a large section of armor connected to it,
Oh, that is true.
then if the giant beam is kind of cut, it all comes off. Or if a single small beam is cut, only a section of it comes off.
No, that depends on your bolting.
Yeah, and it may not even make a massive difference because it's a voxel destruction, so it's not like once the beam gets below a certain hit point, it then just entirely disappears. Just a small section will be cut out depending on where you shoot it. So
Mm-hmm.
it may not make any impact whatsoever, but
Well, there is a thing that can cause that, and that's corrosive damage, I think.
Yes.
Oh, so maybe does it carry across, like, or does it just stay on the single structure it's hit?
It's well, I think it stays on the structure it's hit, but if you then if you get corrosive damage and then that structure gets cut in two, both bits will have corrosive damage on it for a certain amount of time.
Okay, so maybe the less, more beams could work then.
Yeah.
Something I was considering for this though is not only when you connect multiple beams together does it like say you connect 3 beams together, not only is it just going from 3 parts to one, but you also have to consider the brackets and the bolts that are connecting them. So that kind of sort of extrapolates on top of the effect because you have to connect every single beam to every other beam. And you have the bracket and 2 bolts or more if you're paranoid. That could be potentially 9 to 12 parts ish.
It could end up being very time consuming if you're building it by hand. Because you'd have to place, because from what we've seen, you'd have to place every single bracket independently,
Right.
which would have a lot of just going back and forth over and over, picking up a bracket, moving it across. So
I do have a question about the efficiency of the game. Is how big do you think the automation companies are going to be? Like where they either manufacture whole ships automatically out, excluding pipes and wires and like specialty items, but just the hull, and maybe even just like sub ship parts, so like large sections of hull they could just be applied to a large number of ships.
To start with, I think at least I think it's going to take months before anyone gets a manufacturing system that will build a complete finished ship. Obviously, minus cabling and whatnot, but like a full finished ship, I don't think that's going to happen for months. For larger like component parts, I think yes, you could get it to like make you specific beams and armor bolted on and things like that. But for a whole ship, it's going to take a lot of setup to get that right.
I think it's going to be a bit of a race.
Well, yes, but once these companies are established, I think they will be very valuable for the market because as Starbase is a game where combat will be mattering a lot, they would be constantly producing warships, for example, as there would be high demand for them.
This is true, but you've also got to take into consideration that on one side, you're going to have these people wanting to make their manufacturing plants that will build this one specific type of ship. But that plant itself will have to set up to make that one ship. And if you want to make a different ship, you're going to need a completely different setup for your manufacturing. Whereas the other side of the coin or the equation is going to be people that are designing it in the ship designer, making it, getting the station to build it for them. It's going to be more expensive, but they can then test and iterate that design a lot quicker. And if there's a big problem or if the meta changes, they're going to come around with a solution much, much quicker than the companies or factions that have these manufacturing capabilities, because it's going to take so long to set up a new manufacturing route for a different ship.
Right, and I think that's going to come down to is being able to use a combination of both methods because, like you said, being able to test different designs and see if things are working the way that you expect them to, using the ship designer and to build it is a good way to prototype it. But for economic efficiency, you're going to want that automated setup. So once you find that design, it might be beneficial to transition your method of production. And also, due to the fact that if you have a design, pretty much anyone could go into a ship designer and build it and pay for it with the station payment system in game. But not everyone is going to have that level of income or that money available, so they're going to be looking for cheaper, better alternatives.
Oh, I agree. Like in the long run, if you're mass producing a ship and the meta's not going to change for a while or hasn't changed for a while, then yeah, you're going to make a lot more money on your ship sale if you've gone out and gathered materials and factory built your ship without having to pay the station to do it for you. Then yeah, that's going to work absolutely great. But the second it changes, then you've got a big job to redo your factory. So it's a risk reward and payoff for different circumstances.
I mean, it also depends how much the meta changes. Like, if the meta just changes weapons-wise, it would take a lot less retrofitting because you just have to change kind of how the arms move in a position just to attach different weapons, or maybe slightly change the frame to attach different weapons. But yeah, if like the whole meta changed, like everything, like entire ship design goes out the window, then yeah, it would have massive time to have to redesign the entire factory.
That's the thing. Like, if you have just weapons change, if they bring in a new damage type or weapon type, that may change your entire armor strategy for a ship. People might be doing like multi-layered hulls for, got defense against torpedoes or missiles, and then if suddenly a different type of weapon that maybe does fracture damage all the way through the ship, then you're gonna have to start
Oh
thinking.
God.
Yeah, they could add literally anything. They could have it like set fire to the inside of your ship. There could be all sorts of different things they can do, and they're going to be adding all of these new types of weapons like through early access. So I think it won't just change your weapon setup. I think it will change the way you want to defend against these weapons as well.
Yeah, and like touching on that on like a side note, I think one weapon that would be sick to see is like you said, because I think we do have a few weapons that kind of fracture individual pieces. But I think one weapon that would be cool to see is kind of like you'd have to be like quite close. But, like the best way I can describe it is like a seismic audio weapon that kind of just shatters everything, which would be pretty sick.
Now, this is probably also why having automated production of a ship is or can be pretty rewarding. But it's also a really risky thing in case something gets changed. You have to scrap the whole factory if it's worst case.
I think best case scenario is for production companies to have a methodology for creating these factories in which they build them in a modular setting. So they structure it in a way that you don't have to completely redesign the entire factory. You just have to rearrange, maybe have some rail movers with the actual assembly arms that can reposition them and then just reprogram each one in its new position and go from there. Especially if you're going from building it as sub building blocks. So say you take the bottom half of the hull and then you take the front right corner. You only have to build that front right corner in the line and then attach that. If you were to change something, you just have to change that part of the ship.
Now, that would probably even result in factions that are entirely specialized on building factories, simply because it is a really hard thing to pull off correctly and in an effective way.
But like also on the whole modular kind of just one thing being, like one corner being just separate and being attached. But for all we know, there could be a limit on like how much the tractor beams can move, because from what we've seen from the footage, it seems to be one of the only really ways you can effectively move all the pieces to be through the kind of like tractor beam things. And so there may be a weight limit on them.
Well, so from what I understand is it applies force based on the mass of the object and the distance from its origin, so whatever's projecting the tractor beam. And then if it's heavier, it's going to get further away, but as it gets further away, it's going to apply more force to it to catch it up to the host ship. So it'll just be a question of power at that point, I think. And I think it'll probably be an exponential sort of formula to limit you hypothetically rather than literally. Another thing to consider is we were talking about meta changes and say the addition of a new damage type or a new weapon that changes armor. Rather than completely scrapping your production for that ship, sell it at a discount. As you work on the new ship, you sell this old ship for a discount to the public, get more sales out of it, and then eventually, yeah, it'll stop being bought because everyone either has that ship, or because it's obsolete. In which case, you can just repurpose it for a later project. But while you're selling it at discount, you can start on your new factory somewhere else.
I guess that fully depends on how much profit margin you have in your ship in the first place.
That's fair. That's a fair point.
Because at the moment, we don't know how much the ships are going to cost that the devs have put in the game. Now, if you want to make a ship that's kind of equal to one of those, but your own version, you've got to be able to get the parts cheaper or the resources cheaper, and then get it built cheaper than them to offer it at a cheaper price. But then you don't know how much profit margin that they've built
Right.
into their costs as well.
Well, so the thing about with like insurance, and I assume also the ships, in the station that you can buy pre-built. I assume it's a similar pricing model based on the parts in use. That's the only, and maybe like have some sort of multiplier based on the part count, so bigger ships cost more. It's not like a linear increase. That's just speculation, but that's how I would see it being done. And the way they explained it is building it from the resources will always be much cheaper than if you were to buy the parts or to buy the ship directly, which leads me to believe that the markup on refining and manufacturing is going to be massive.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, it definitely is from the point of buying it from the station, getting the station to do that for you. But that's you've got the other side of the coin of that is building it yourself is, at least by hand, hugely time intensive.
Oh yeah. Like they said something like it would take one person 50 hours to make their biggest ship right now.
Yeah, I think they built it with a team of people over the course of two or 3 months, I think. But yeah, if you knew where everything went, or if you were doing it from a blueprint that you'd already set up, then yeah, you could probably do it a bit quicker. But it's still going to take a long while.
That's insane. Just the amount of time that's going to go into actually like designing the ship as well, and redesigning. Even if you get halfway through it and you decide, hey, this isn't a great place for this, you have to completely strip it back and figure out how to rearrange things.
There's so many things to consider as well, because you've got to have access points for coolant cells, reloading ammunition, reloading missiles. You've got to be able to change the fuel rods. There's so much stuff that you're going to need access to within a ship just for its maintenance.
I think also though, like a lot of people have been kind of worrying about how, obviously they have all these plans for these massive ships. But on early access, they're saying it's probably going to be limited to around the maximum, large Empire ship they've made. I think, obviously, from my, limited knowledge and looking at the videos, I still think that's a reasonable size within the game, because obviously we don't know, obviously we know it's 150 meters, and yeah, that's a lot smaller than what we're used to in Space Engineers. But from when I was watching it, I still felt like that was a pretty large and substantial ship. Like it was still going to be able to be quite a powerful and large ship, even at that size.
Oh, definitely. And another thing that people are completely underestimating is how many people you need to crew this. Like Space Engineers, yes, you could make a half a kilometer long ship, cover it with guns, and then the computer takes care of the rest because all the guns auto target and work by themselves. But you play it in Starbase, you're going to need people to man different sections of your ship, where you've got maybe the front top corner, all their guns are slaved together, and the bottom left is all slaved together as well. And they're going to have to be targeted separately, or you'll have individual people per gun, which I think will be a really interesting scenario.
Oh no. So that's actually been a common conversation topic for us when we're designing ships, is when we have a order come in or a plan for a ship, figuring out and agreeing upon the actual crew is so frustrating because everyone has their own view on who needs to do what. And I just keep going back to the example of the developer said that even with like 3 or 4 people on some of their small to medium sized fighter, they were getting a bit overwhelmed with all the stuff they had to keep up with in their battle scenes. And I think that's really going to be a good benchmark for what we should aim for.
And I think going off having to have these large crews will lead to, I think, a very different kind of style of gameplay than what a lot of people who first see it think of. Because a lot of people, when they first see it, especially if you haven't really read into it a lot, will kind of think, oh, Space Engineers. And, kind of like EVE Online kind of size fleets. It will be nowhere near that, like it may be really well optimized to be able to support that size of fleet. But realistically, you're going to be getting nowhere near the size of these massive fleets you see in other games. Like most large engagements will probably be maximum 5 of these massive ships, because that will be about as much as a single faction, some of these large factions could really fill to put out at a time.
I don't know about that. I think honestly it's going to come down to being able to automate certain things on the bigger ships, because of course with the bigger ships you could have up to like 30 crew, 50 crew, including boarding security, so to prevent people on the ship, as well as to account for losses during the battle so it can still function. I think running bare minimum is going to be a problem. But when you have factions claiming they have about 1,000 members, and the game isn't even out yet, so as soon as the game comes out, that's going to skyrocket. You're going to have probably tens of thousands of members in the main factions that aren't dev factions, of course. And I think they will have the resources. I think they will have the people to man these massive ships. But I think it'll be less so about having these massive ships as their primary force. It'll be these ships reinforcing a fleet of smaller ships, maybe even as just carriers. But of course, me and 3 have been working on the automation technology of certain things. And 3, without giving away anything, maybe could go into a little bit of insight into how we would automate and go about automating these functions.
So we would basically take away some of the crew needs for repeating tasks that are day-to-day needed. So we can limit the needed crew count, which would be really important because it's basically also a large limiting factor to a ship's size and the fleet size. For example, you could automate the weapons in some basic function to limit the amount of guns you need.
Excellent. And something that people have been saying that they're struggling with is they're saying that there is no form of automatic tracking, and I say that is a limit of your applications. If you can figure it out and figure out how to combine these mechanics, you can do it. All of it, everything that you need is already in the game. You just have to figure out how to assemble it. And I think that's really where the research companies are going to come in, because they're going to have new ways of having asynchronous parallel systems that essentially increase the clock speed, essentially. And that will allow you to have near real-time computation using the YOLO chips. What are your thoughts on that, Kenetor?
Well, I'm not a huge YOLO pro for coding and stuff, but I don't know. It depends. We're gonna have to get in game for that sort of stuff to really see what is possible, to test these theories out. Because at the moment, until we actually get the game, all they are is theories. So while it could work on paper, if it doesn't work in game, then that takes out an entire chunk of research that you might have already done. So these theories definitely need proving before they can be put into action. For the crew needs on a ship, I think the most important part of a crew is going to be the repair crew, because you are definitely going to get situations where your power is going to be cut to your weapons, and you could have the biggest ship as you like, but if your main lines and redundant lines of energy get cut to your reactor, all your ships are just going, all your guns are just going to go dead, and you're going to need crew to prioritize those specific repairs, and no automated system is going to be able to do that for you.
Right. And I think that really emphasizes the point that people are underestimating the amount of work that goes into keeping ships running. Like, not only do you have to repair these wires and man the guns and control subsystems, like using user input to confirm or deny certain parameters, but also you have to consider is fuel management. Like, who's going to walk down to the other end of the ship and replace some fuel rods? You don't want to have to everyone leave their post to go do this. This needs to be something that is taken care of at its source. And having those extra people do that will just make you that much more efficient in combat.
So it'll just raise the crew requirements even further.
Right.
I think this is also one of the most important tasks of a design team of a company, that is to limit or just minimize the amount of effort it takes to refuel a ship, for example, or just keep it running, because that is one of the most influential factors to the crew amount needed.
I think with regards to efficiency, I'm also interested to see exactly how the quote-unquote space drag will work, because I've seen lots of different stuff being flung around the Discord. You've got some people going, oh, it's completely simulated off how, like IRL drag works, and depending on how heavy the vehicle is, you've got to have above a certain threshold of thrust to be able to keep it going. While other people are going, oh, as long as the ship has at least some force being applied to it will continue going at a constant speed?
Well, they have said that the optimal thrust is 70 or around 70%. I doubt it's actually exactly 70%, but with the optimal being 70%, if you were to lower it below that, I have a feeling then your max speed would lower. So as far as drag goes, I would say that the function or the equation for it is something tied into both your mass and your speed. So the higher your speed, no matter what your weight, the higher your drag, the higher your mass, no matter what your speed, the higher your drag. How that exactly that's associated, I can't say, but I can say that heavier ships will require almost exponentially more thrusters to go at the same speeds as a fighter.
Oh, I completely agree as well. It's definitely going to be based on weight, and something that the devs have said as well, that max limit of 150, no dev has even reached that yet. That's the limit they coded in the game, but they haven't built a ship that can go that fast yet. So there is a curve involved. It's not linear.
But with like the drag, is there obviously it's kind of sounding a bit dumb, but is there going to be like some sort of aerodynamics, or is it purely not obviously not aerodynamics, but something similar? Like if you shape your ship correct, will it go faster, or is it purely based off weight?
It is purely based off mass.
Okay, so I can make some monstrosity brick thing.
Well, the developers even have, like, the fastest ship that they've shown is just a brick. It's just a box with thrusters on the back, and they saw it spinning around, and saw it taking off as well. And I think it's also really important to know just how fast it is accelerating. Not just how fast it's going, but how quickly it gets to that speed. And that's going to be a big part of designing bigger ships and trying to make them combat efficient, because if you have a massive ship and you don't have enough thrusters, it's going to not be able to accelerate very quickly. And if you have, say, a torpedo coming in from medium range, if you can't get up to speed, you're not going to be able to dodge it, even like especially with the tracking.
Yeah, I think these are the values that companies, I think actually all of them, will want to figure out pretty early, like as early on as possible, because they are crucial for designing ships the right way.
Right. And me and Three, I actually spoke with you about how to not directly find it, but draw data on the drag. So essentially measuring speed of a ship using a third party or a disconnected system, or maybe even on board if you could figure it out. But utilizing that to figure out the position of the ship, then you get a function for that, you integrate it. Or actually, you take the derivative of it, and then you take the derivative of that, you get the acceleration. So if you reach max speed and then you cut your thrust and you can see how quickly you are decelerating, you'll know exactly how much force is being applied to your ship at any given time. So it's going to come down to data processing as well out of game, which I think is going to be really cool, and being able to trade that data.
Well, yes, I think many companies underestimate the value of R&D because it's like they don't really think that much about these values that they need to know in order to design ships efficiently and optimally.
I think a big problem is going to be a lot of companies are going to neglect the research part, and that's not going to work for them because research is what drives the meta. Finding these new techniques of doing things is what is going to determine what is quote unquote best in slot. And I think by having people dedicated to just testing the mechanics and learning the game, if you have a whole team of people doing that, that puts your company miles ahead of what any other company could do, even if they had 100 more people working on a project.
I mean, it could even lead to like research deals of companies going, okay, we'll combine R&D departments or combine resources to get this massive project researched.
Or just research companies that don't build ships; they just research and take on contracts for people. And this also goes into like the whole trading of information. Like I've seen some companies say that they want to trade exclusively in information about the game and about political standpoints and trade secrets. So I think figuring out how to discover new mechanics or new applications of mechanics in the game, as well as figuring out how to keep them from people that aren't supposed to have them, is going to be a really interesting topic of discussion. So another thing you have to consider is with these research and development portions of the community, is they are building up different factions right now, even before the game comes out, and theorizing about the game, which of course brings in a level of planning that some companies may not be accounting for. They may just be like, okay, we'll figure it out when we get in the game, but that may be a while. So taking this time to plan before we get access to the game is going to be crucial to the success of early game. Maybe not long term, but it's going to get you a head start. Especially like going into the groups that are selected for maybe the closed alpha, because right now we don't know how they're doing their selection process. We don't know how they're transitioning from closed alpha to closed beta, open beta, so on. And whether that comes down to they're going to do a server wipe to transition, I don't know. What are your thoughts?
I think the selection for the closed beta and closed alpha will be very important. And it'll be interesting to see what they do, because obviously, if either some factions get in, some don't, or a large group of players from one faction get in where no other factions really do, I feel like it would lead to quite an unfair advantage. I think they definitely have to have server wipes going into an open beta state to allow for an even playing field. But I think they would also need to kind of look at who they're going to let in, because I feel like there would be a massive advantage to already having game experience from the closed alphas and betas.
So as far as I see it, the people are thinking that getting hold of access to closed beta is going to be super key and stuff for getting ahead, and I think that's completely wrong. Mostly due to the fact that a lot of these systems are pure bare bones right now, and the whole point of the closed alpha is to break the game, figure out where it's going wrong, what's not working correctly, and report that back to the devs. And the more people actively report the problems, the quicker we'll get out of the closed section and more into an open section. As for how they want to assign people to it, I think Lowry was saying initially they just want to bring in a small select bunch of active community members from like either active on forums, active on the Discord, that sort of thing. Bring them in, get testing with those guys first, and then they want to gradually increase the amount of people who have access to the closed, and then eventually opening up to many players. And so it's just going to be that different stages of testing, and that's all they're going to be focused on is what's working, what's not working, and how quick can we fix it. And then at the end of the closed beta, they are going to wipe everything and then open it up to early access.
Oh, nice.
That's a good idea. And regarding accessing the close, how early do we think it's going to happen? Because obviously, some people may not like me mentioning this. There was that whole conspiracy theory on there was a 16, and which I personally don't believe. It's just two different designs they showed. But also, there was that whole conspiracy theory that kind of triggered people into it. What is everyone's kind of opinion of when you think we're going to get it? Do you think we are going to get? Obviously, on my Steam page, it still says 2019. So do you think we're still going to get at least a closed alpha this year? Or do you think it now will be delayed to next year?
Definitely going to be this year. Definitely. Judging from because obviously I do the news updates as a video format every week, and looking at everything they're currently doing over the last 2-3 weeks now, including this week, they've listed quite a bit of polished states, and you don't polish anything in a game until large section events are complete. So with that amount of polish and specifically focus on multiplayer testing, I can see it coming very soon. And my personal prediction is by the end of this month for closed beta testing.
And obviously with play testing coming out, how well do we think, obviously it will still require, a fairly decent PC, but how well do you think it is going to be optimized? Because of course at the moment, if I remember correctly, on the minimum specs on a Steam page, they're saying 1066 gigs and a relatively new CPU. Do you think it will get optimized better beyond that point, or do you think that will kind of be the limit due to kind of the technical, all the processing and stuff the game has to do?
I think it'll be completely fine for a lot of people. A few devs have stated that they've tested it on their home PCs, and that's pretty much the only differences they've got from their work PCs. And some of these people have like Core i5s, they're not particularly strong processors, and they said it works fine. From what I've seen from the little bits they've shared on the Discord as well, in terms of texture resolution, they've really done well currently from the beginning of optimizing how low the texture resolutions will go to save on graphics card memory. So if you've got an older graphics card with say 2 gigs of memory or 4 gigs of memory, then you're still going to be able to run it just as well as the higher level ones.
That's a worry I've been seeing a lot of people coming up from Discord, and I for one am worried about it because not until at least after Christmas, most likely after my kind of birthday, I'm stuck with basically a 1052 gig. And a lot of people kind of in the same position as me, they've still got, the kind of lower end, less powerful graphics cards that are kind of very much showing their age now and very much limiting us on what we can actually play.
I think you'll be fine.
Yeah, me and a lot of other people I've seen on Discord are very worried that if we do get some sort of playability, sure, you may get invited to it, but will you actually be able to play it?
Well, that's part of the testing as well. They need to test many different types of system setups, and they're not going to be able to do that without getting more people involved. And that's again a large part of what the closed testing is for. But for lower end graphics cards, sure, you'll be able to play it. I think definitely. You just won't be able to turn it up to quite a high level as what other people will with more powerful graphics cards. I think it will scale really well.
I'm perfectly happy to have it on lower graphics settings, just as long as
I think you'll be fine.
Can hit consistent 60 FPS. I can still play the game, but isn't mad lag or slowdown when we have combat or collisions. I'll be perfectly happy. I don't really care if I'm getting lower graphics or less lighting interactions or anything compared to other people.
I think it's going to be really important with the optimization of it as well is not finding like minimum specs, but optimizing it for the stronger PCs. Because building your game only to be optimized for that lower end sort of system, there needs to be some sort of accurate scaling. And if you don't test it on the super high end computers as well, and this is going to go back into the closed alpha, closed beta scenario, is if you're not getting that level of performance for what you paid for your graphics card, people are going to see your game as unoptimized when in reality it's just optimized for a different region of the population.
So something back on the week 43 update for the progress update, they've got an automatic LOD system, which I think is pretty genius. Basically, it will regenerate the mesh using voxels instead of the actual mesh itself. So if you're on a really low end computer, it will redo all the meshes in the game for you to a much lower level of detail. So it's going to be rendering a lot faster, use a lot less RAM, and it can scale that all the way from the lowest end to the highest end, because the highest end can just use the models that we're seeing on screen at the moment.
Something I am really interested in is how they handle the actual models of the ship. From what it looks like as you build the ship, it becomes one model, but with like multiple hit regions. Is that about how it works, would you say? So like visually it is one model.
From what I've seen, yeah, visually, that's just down to how close the snapping is. This is why all the sizes of everything is important, and why they've put so much time into the modularity of all the components to make everything fit precisely. So if you've got two polygons from two different models that are smack bam next to each other, they are going to look exactly like the same piece of model. And that's what you're seeing, but they're always going to be separate pieces. So if you've got one armor plate that gets destroyed, it doesn't have to resplit a model. It's always separate. It just looks like it's one.
So graphically, it unifies the visual representation, but as far as hitboxes go, it treats them as separate, is what I'm gathering from that. And that's really interesting how they did that as well, is because some games, like I'm pretty sure with Space Engineers, it doesn't update the visual model. Sorry, it renders them all separately in a grid. And I think that's where the two games split.
No, that's exactly the same.
Oh, do
The-
they have the same tech?
Yeah, well, kind of. They went as far as Space Engineer is concerned, they do it exactly the same. So where you get the two cubes of armor blocks next to each other, the bit that they've done differently there is they've made it so their textures will tile across all continually flat surfaces. And so it looks like one surface, but exactly the same as in Starbase. Starbase doesn't have any textures on its armor plates yet. That's going to come a bit later. But it's the exact same thing. They're perfectly aligned next to each other. There's no gap in between them, so you visually see them as one piece, but they're always separate pieces.
And so I think those, as you were saying, the meshes kind of, while looking the same, being separate, will be very important for combat because, you've got to have those accurate hitboxes even when at range. But obviously, we'll talk more about that next episode where combat and PvP will be our main focus. But for now, to round off the episode, we're going to be asking Kenetor a few little questions. So straight away, Kenetor, just, it's a very simple question. What kind of are your aims, within Starbase?
For me, I just want to get involved in a lot of stuff where you could just work together with people. I don't care if it's going on fleet battles. I just want to be like a part of the crew or leading a crew or a cooperative ship designing, that sort of stuff. It just the whole working together with people is something I never really got enough of out of games like Space Engineers, and Starbase is really going to deliver on that, I think.
So you're like really aiming to be part of the community then?
Oh, definitely.
Very hands-on with your, especially with your factions interactions. Rather than just playing behind the scenes, you're down there working with them.
Oh, definitely. Like, I don't like having like big rank structures in factions. I think it can really bog some factions down when they go a bit too over the top with it. And I also strongly believe in leading by example. So if you're going to ask someone to do something, you best know how to do it yourself as well.
Right. That's actually something that we are very dedicated to in Skyjack is to get a position, you have to at least be competent in the positions that you're kind of leading. So if you're in charge of figuring out orders, you have to know the entire design process and what works, what doesn't, why, and be able to tell people why it doesn't work. And that's going to go into combat as well.
Even when it goes all the way down to like the basic jobs, like going out and doing mining, I'm going to be right there with the rest of my faction guys, and we're all going to do it as like a group activity because I don't want to send people off to go work for me. They're playing the game for fun, so we'll make it a fun thing to do together.
Right. I did have another question is, how do you see your channel's content evolving after the game comes out?
That's a really good question. I'd love to know the answer myself. I really wasn't expecting the response that I already had. Like the first, I think, 2 months, the views were kind of just trickling in. It was exactly what I expected out of a brand new channel on YouTube. And then one night, everything changed. YouTube decided to recommend it to like another 20,000 people, and just everything just went haywire. And now all of a sudden, people are recognizing like who I am on the Discords and leaving tons of comments on my videos. And it's just been an incredible development, really. And I just hope it continues. Really, I don't really look for anything more than that. I enjoy making the videos. As long as people enjoy watching them, that makes me happy too.
And so you mentioned like people kind of recognizing you and like also your faction earlier. Can you tell us like a little bit about your faction?
So my main goals for the faction is just making it a friendly place to enjoy and learn how to play the game. And as I was saying earlier with the group activities, we want to get involved in having a segment that wants to race to the moon and give Lunar Corp some competition, for example. The racing league that's going to be set up, I want to get a team in on that. Maybe be a racer myself. It could be a lot of fun. So yeah, we want to focus around like stuff that we can all do together and get involved with.
Now, do you see when the game comes out? Do you see yourself being a more of a reporting sort of channel where you give like changes to the game and maybe faction status updates, or do you see yourself actually recording the gameplay and maybe like commentating on what you're doing and where you see the game going from in the game?
Both actually. Like because I'm a 3D artist by trade, I kind of, as you might have seen in some of the news updates I do each week, I kind of break down some of the more developer orientated terms that they use to a bit more plain English, so people can understand them. So I'd like to speculate further on where the game's going to go once it's out and we're actually inside and seeing what you can do in the game. That'd be really cool. I really want to cover player events like we spoke about earlier, anything that people setting up, be it like combat events, racing events, as well as being part of those if I can. I also want to cover them and show them off to everybody else on the channel.
Right, and I think it's going to be really cool to see your kind of story for building up this faction, and even if it's not meant to be a game-changing faction or the top three, the big three, they're eventually going to settle. I think it's going to be really cool to see how you build up that community, and even if you're not part of it, be able to track the progress of these people that come and go as you progress.
Yeah, one of the things I was really hoping to do is kind of build a signature ship. So hopefully it doesn't get copied, but I'm sure someone will try and troll people. But if they see that ship, they kind of know it's me and then won't attack me because they know I'll be doing stuff for the channel. And then I'll have like my normal ship when I'm doing like faction activities with the rest of my crew. Then, if there's people that hate my faction and want to go to war with me, well, then that's fine. But if I'm in my kind of Kenetor ship, then they know that I'm trying to cover something for the channel that will most likely benefit them as well. So hopefully people can give me a little kind of green card on a pass for certain areas of space, and then that way I can go around. I can visit people's mega stations. I can visit people's shipyards and factories and do little tours of them without having to fight my way across the system to try and just go do a quick interview with somebody in game. But we'll see when it turns around.
Yeah. And so I think we got one more question from Free.
Yes, I was about to ask, are you considering to be main media person about Starbase? So will you be more a person with a lot of influence in the media about Starbase? Or do you plan to take it a more casual route and do it besides your main things in game?
Do you mean like real life media or just like media like in the game and just YouTube?
I mean mainly the media in game and YouTube, but you could also take it to real life.
Well, for me, I think that's up to the community at large, to be fair. I don't get to decide how popular I am or who I represent. It's up to the community to choose who represents them as a community. So, yeah, I don't think it's up to me. But I've got a good response so far, so we'll see.
All right, and then also I wanted to touch on the importance of what you're doing with the patch notes, because like you said, you translate what the developers say in the developer language into plain English for people that aren't necessarily more familiar with the words that they use and the acronyms. But it can be even boiled down to you taking this information as if it's a research document, because a lot of primary sources most people wouldn't understand, but then you have academic journals where journalists will read this primary source and translate it and report on it and explain the implications of it to people that can't piece that together themselves. And it's very important that you're doing that for the player base, for people that can't.
Yeah, I've had a few comments actually on some of the videos thank me explicitly for doing that sort of thing. And I think it's really important because there's a lot of tech that they talk about in some of these news updates, like triplanar textures. That will basically mean you can just put a texture on any shape, which is the problem at the moment. Why we don't have textures on the armor plates is because how do you get all of those armor plates to line up with their textures? Well, triplanar textures is the answer, and it just automatically maps all the textures onto the model. But if you just read that as triplanar textures, no one knows what the hell that means. So I like to add a bit of value that way.
And so I think that's the last of the questions. And so, Kenetor's channel that he's been talking about will be linked down below, really, if you want to check it out. And so, until later, I've been Slash, run by Wall, Kenetor, and Free, and you've been listening to Channel Zero.